Are you ready to lead worship with confidence? Stepping into every worship gathering, every Sunday morning with confidence, knowing that you are ready to do what you need to do and you're going to do it well. I'm going to share with you 3 tips on how to lead worship with confidence. Confidence. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. This is the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. So if you're interested in that, click subscribe down below and let's get into it, because today we're talking about confidence in worship leading. How confident do you feel when you lead worship? Do you get up on stage and you're like, man, I got this. I know the songs. I know what I'm going to say. I know how I'm going to lead my church. I know that God is going to lead me as I lead others. Or do you get up there and you're like, good morning, church. How confident are you? We want to be confident worship leaders, and we can be confident worship leaders because of a few things, which I'm going to share with you here in just a moment. But before we get to that, I want to hear from you. Just straight up front. By the way, if you're like this kind of worship leader, I'm not making fun of you. We're all there whenever we first start leading worship. But I hope through the things that I'm about to share that you get to step up to the microphone with your shoulders back and your head up and say, good morning, church. Let's stand and worship together. We worship a good God who is in control of all things at all times. And you can say these things confidently. That's what we're aiming for. I want to hear from you. How confident are you when you lead worship on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being like super timid, have no idea what you're doing, to 10 being like you are the king of worship leaders? Let us know in the comments below. Talk to you in a second. Thanks for leaving your answer down below. Let's get into these 3 things. This is super quick. How to lead worship with confidence. Number 1 is to know your music. Know your music. Forwards and backwards and backwards and forwards. Know your music as well as you possibly can. When we lead worship, it's actually not about music. That's not the main goal. Our main goal whenever we lead worship isn't to play the songs perfectly. It's not to play the right notes and to sound as good as we can possibly sound for the sake of sounding as good as we can possibly sound. The goal of worship is leading the people that God has placed in front of us. But to lead musical worship, you have to know your music. And it's only once we actually know our music that we can step into the moment confidently. We can step into the moment and say, okay, I know what I'm doing on my guitar. I know how to transition between these songs. I know what words I'm singing. I know all of this. And once you have that and you know it like the back of your hand, that will free you up to actually lead the people of your church, because you won't be thinking, okay, what chord comes next here? When do I go to the D chord? When do I go to the A chord? You aren't thinking about that anymore. You already know it. And so you can have your mind freed up to have your eyes open and be like, all right, this side of the room, they're into it. This side of the room, okay, they're like not paying attention. What's going on? How can I lead in this moment? You can't have those thoughts when you're so concerned about what's coming up next musically. So learn your music forwards and backwards, know it super well, and that will help you lead with confidence. Number 2, sort of in the same vein, is to not just know your music, but know how all of the pieces of your service work together. Know how all of the pieces of your service, which hopefully you've helped plan, mesh together. Once again, this goes from like learning the practical side of things so that you can focus on the spiritual side of things. If you get up on stage or up in front of your church, if you don't have a stage, and you go into your first song and you're like, oh no, like what comes after this first song? Is there another song? Is somebody coming up to pray? Are they doing announcements? Is there like a baby dedication or something? If you don't know the pieces, then you're going to be so focused on that you won't be able to lead through those moments. Whereas if you have the first song and then you've coordinated with your pastor and you're like, okay, there's a baby dedication coming up here. You could reference that baby dedication in the first song and talk about raising up the future generation of believers. And see how much more confident you would be in doing that instead of just like throwing things together last minute because you don't really know what's going on. We got to know all the parts of the service and when they fall, because whenever you have that, you can step onto stage confidently. You aren't like walking up to the microphone and then you realize something else is going on and you kind of back off. No, we got to know all the parts. So make sure you know the outline of your service. I'm telling you, this is huge, because whenever you don't know that, or if you're like in charge of getting people to do the announcements or pray and you don't know who's in charge of it, then you're going to be like looking around like, what's happening next? This is why people do like a run through of their service from just beginning to end. Worship team on stage, host comes up to do announcements, worship team and host leave the stage, the pastor comes up. Near the end of the pastor's sermon, worship team comes back up and starts to play behind them, and then they finish the service out, say goodbye to people and wrap things up. Once you know that, you can step into those moments confidently and lead confidently through those moments. And finally, number 3, to lead worship confidently, just know who you are. Know who you are. First of all, at a base level, you're a child of God. There's forgiveness when mistakes are made. There's grace, even if you don't always feel that from your church, there's grace. A lot of times that unforgiveness is something that we put on ourselves too. But you are a child of God. God has already forgiven you. So if you make a mistake, so what? Fix it for next time. But it already happened. There's nothing you can do about it. You can only fix it for the future, and you're forgiven for it. So just step into those moments where you are unsure confidently, but be prepared so that you aren't unsure. But there's forgiveness. So that's the first thing, but also know who you are. You are a worship leader. Define what your goal is when you lead worship. Like I said at the beginning, your goal isn't just to play music and play it like super well and sound super good for the sake of sounding super good. Your job is to lead the people in your church. And so you can determine whether you've succeeded in your worship leading by that understanding. Did I lead the people in my church well today? And what does that look like? I always talk about this. You can't force people to respond in worship, but you can provide the opportunity to respond. You can point them to the goodness of God. Point them to the goodness of God, provide the opportunity to respond. That's what we do as worship leaders. We are pointing to Jesus. We aren't pushing people to Jesus and forcing them to worship him. It's their choice, ultimately. So start thinking about that. Did I provide the opportunity for people to respond to the goodness of God? If you did a good job. Or maybe there were some distractions. Maybe you didn't know your music as well as you should have this particular Sunday and you messed up a couple parts. Fix it for next Sunday. There's grace. Know who you are. So step into worship leading confidently this Sunday. Whenever you're leading worship next, step into your role confidently. How do you do that? Know your music. Know it forward and backwards. Actually, know your music so well that you don't have to think about it when you play it. Number 2, know who you are. Know who you are. You are a child of God. You are a worship leader. And number 3, know how all of the different pieces of your service work together so that you can navigate those transitions confidently. If you want some more worship leading tips and you want to improve your worship leading, I've got some free audio trainings for you. There's a link down in the description to a free audio training called 5 Tips to Instantly Improve Your Worship Leading. Check it out in the description below. Super simple 5 tips, really quick, that would just help you improve your worship leading if you're just conscious of them and make the effort to do them. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.